working at the grassroots level with small businesses, so it was a really great project. But in talking to them, I realized more and more that they didn't have a federal trade association to represent their interests. They didn't have anyone speaking to politicians provincially, federally, across Canada. And so I got in touch with a friend of mine who was a volunteer with Sensible BC. It was an organization that did the decriminalization petition in British Columbia a few years ago. And so she had a background organizing the cannabis industry. And the two of us partnered up, and we launched our own organization, and we were in the middle of organizing the community. We had a whole bunch of businesses ready to sign up and join our association. And then right when we were ready to do that, we got in contact with the Cannabis Growers of Canada, which were an organization that mostly represented growers, but they wanted to start linking up with dispensaries and the whole kind of economy. And they said, hey, we'd love to merge with you, and so long story short, we merged with them. So now I'm the executive director of the Cannabis Growers of Canada, and we represent dispensaries, the value-added product makers, the growers, the ancillary services, the head shops, that kind of stuff, the whole industry.
So I have a question.
Sure.
Is it okay to smoke pot on the job?
That's a complicated question, because first of all, is it a medical condition that requires constant consumption? If it is, then of course, right? I mean, it also depends on the job, right? I mean, we recognize that, certain people with certain medical conditions might not be suited for certain jobs, right? Like certain people can't be pilots or truck drivers because of a medical condition. But there are jobs for them, right? And we have support services precisely to link people with specific disabilities up to specific jobs. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say, okay, you can't be a pilot if you have to consume cannabis all day long, for your condition.
Sure.
But if you're a customer service person and your manager thinks that your performance is excellent no matter what your cannabis consumption might be, then of course. I mean, there's been enough studies we've seen that habitual cannabis consumers, like medical patients, they develop a high tolerance to the intoxicating effects of THC, and so they tend to not get quote unquote high, like they've done a lot of studies in the United States because they're concerned about, do you let these people drive, right? If you're a medical cannabis patient. And the studies are showing that the habitual cannabis users don't usually have a problem performing, all of the major motor tasks, memory tasks, all the things you would want them to. So I think it depends.
It's just being responsible.
Exactly. And having a conversation with your manager, the company, right? Like, there's a job for everyone, right? We recognize that it's important to give people with severe disabilities an opportunity to participate in the workforce, right? And this is no different.
Do you think marijuana is helpful for depression? I don't know if you know any of the stats around that.
Absolutely, I think it is. I think that what we're discovering more and more is that it's not just the THC in the cannabis, it's all these other cannabinoids, and they're very complicated, and we're starting to see the science behind how many different things that they can touch in the human body. People don't realize it's not just something that gets you high. It's a complicated medical phenomenon. I mean, there's receptors in your spleen, the whole rest of your body, that interact with CBD, which is why it doesn't get people high, because it doesn't touch the brain. CBD strictly interacts with the rest of your immune system, basically. And so that is something we only just discovered a few years ago, right?
Do you want to do it? This is Remone.
Hi, Remone.
He's called Mr. Merkaba on this podcast. Do you have a business card?
I do, yes.
That way I'll let you know before it's aired, because it's being aired in consecutive order, although I'm going to try to get the ones that are, this is kind of a moment in history, I think, in Toronto.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
What would you say about this moment in history in Toronto?
Oh, what would I say? I would say that this is a moment in history in Canada. We are on the cusp of legalizing something.
You didn't realize.
Yeah. I mean, this moment in history it's bigger than Toronto. It's about Canada, because we're on the cusp of legalizing cannabis. We're going to be one of the first countries in the world to do that. And the question becomes, what do we want out of that, right? Do we just want to take cannabis and sell it in these, brown paper bags in the back of a pharmacy, in the back of a liquor store? Or do we want to admit that people like cannabis? They like consuming it when it's local, fresh, organic, when there's what the wine industry calls the terroir. Like, where does the product come from? What's the flavor of the country, of the sun, of the clay in that particular region? Why is cannabis any different? So what we're saying at the Cannabis Growers of Canada is, let's embrace that. Let's embrace cannabis. Let's make it a craft economy, right? Where you have local producers, local sellers, specialists. It doesn't mean you can't have the big agricultural companies as well, any more than it means that you can't have Budweiser and a local microbrew coexist in the same economy. We're arguing that the jobs, the economic benefits, the tourism will come from the craft economy, not from the big pharmacy chains selling the mass-produced cannabis.
Yeah. He's coming from Yeah, you're representing today.
Yeah.
So are you smoking today?
I'm not because I'm working, but
Okay,
that, you know.
so you choose not to smoke while you're working?
Yeah, well, but you know.
this only enforces your...
Well, listen, I'll tell you, I smoke when I'm not meeting politicians. I smoke when I'm writing. I smoke when I'm, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I consume medical cannabis because I have severe nausea caused by a really bad bout of gastroenteritis a few years ago.
Okay.
So when I get stressed out, I can't eat. And my doctor told me, you have to bring your weight up. And I was taking meal replacement shakes, you know, they were talking about medication. And I was like, I'm from Vancouver, so I said, can I just smoke weed? And he's an old-timey family doctor, so he hadn't even thought of that. And he was like, yeah, actually, yeah, you should smoke weed. You know, it's better for you. It's less hard, because he was thinking of all the side effects of the medications he was going to give me. And he was like, cannabis, I don't care. You know, so I started.
We all know the side effects.
Yeah, it makes you hungry. Guess what?
That's why
what
they
I
make
need.
the commercials so long.
There must be strains of weed that don't make you hungry.
Of course, yeah. There's well,
I don't
for
need to
instance,
increase
CBD is actually an appetite suppressant. So
Okay.
if you don't have
Oh.
THC, yeah. So it's and this is what I'm saying. Like cannabis is so complicated, medically speaking. We're only beginning to untap the potential of. It's not even the THC and the CBD. There's other chemicals in there that are being studied for MS or for Alzheimer's because they have a kind of a protective effect on your brain. So there's just so much research
They are
that we
more
need to do.
willing to do it.
Yeah, well, when America starts to crack, that's when the money starts to flow in, right? And people can start to do the research because as long as it's a Schedule I controlled drug in America, you can't do any medical research in any American university or lab. And I'm sorry, that's where all the research comes from these days, right? So it's unfortunate that we've handicapped ourselves like this, but we're getting there. And
And the FDA is bought for
Yeah.
certain individuals.
oh, for sure. I mean, you have to ask yourself, why is the pharmaceutical industry trying to invent artificial cannabis? Right? Why are they trying to invent all these artificial cannabinoids? There was that drug trial in France where 5 people or 8 people, whatever it was, died. That was an artificial cannabinoid. They're trying to reinvent a plant that already exists because they want to patent it. Because there's more money in owning it than there is in admitting that anyone can grow some medicine that might be a miracle cure.
So what direction are we moving with the law as far as growing your own marijuana?
There's a lot of moving parts right now. There's a lot of lobbyists in this country that are trying to get a monopoly on it for either retail or for growing. A lot of rhetoric about the criminal underground and how we need to stamp it out. We at the CGC believe that the only way legalization works is if you bring the black market into the daylight. And so that's a big priority of ours is educating politicians that there are tens of thousands of jobs in Canada that depend on the cannabis economy.
Yeah.
You know, the point you guys
will
have
even increase.
exactly. If we want it to increase, it will. If we do it right, it will. But even let's ignore the potential for benefits. Let's just talk about the risks. If you crush the independent cannabis economy, you've just unemployed tens of thousands of young Canadians who live in rural areas if they're growers, or they're urban if they're and they make a good living wage urban job as a bud tender or whatever you call them. Those people will be out of work. And what have you gained? A couple of warehouses that grow mediocre hemp basically on an industrial scale, a couple of liquor store employees, but even then Kathleen Wynne has said there'll be no jobs created at the liquor store. She said that. So she said there will be no increased labor costs at the liquor store. What does that mean? No new jobs. So the question you need to ask yourself is, what's the benefit versus the risk? The risk is we put 30,000 whatever people out of work across Canada, northern British Columbia, Ontario, wherever, and we get nothing for it. Why would you do that? Why would you do that, right?
And LCBO, in my opinion, shouldn't.
They shouldn't be
No,
selling it?
no,
They
no, no.
shouldn't be selling.
The mental
In my
health
opinion.
industry, the mental health industry will tell you that. The mental health experts, the harm reduction people, you put cannabis and alcohol in the same store and you're buying trouble.
Yeah.
Well, you have people who smoke cannabis as a harm reduction strategy because they're recovered alcoholics and that's part of their management. They're going to go into a liquor store now.
You're right.
I mean, why did we invent the word crunk to describe what happens when you're stoned and drunk? It's because one beer,
Right?
one hit of a
my
joint,
God.
you're way more intoxicated than you would have been
Oh my God.
for either of those
That
things.
makes
So we're going to
much
put both substances in one roof. We don't sell beer in the pharmacy because that's inappropriate.
Right.
Why would we mix cannabis and alcohol or cannabis and Oxycontin? Why would you put cannabis in the pharmacy? Right? It just doesn't make sense to me the way they're thinking about this.
Your points are very logical.
And every time I meet a politician and I explain it to them, the light bulb goes off. You can see it in their eyes. Like we met with Jim Carey-Giannis here in Toronto, and he was, talking about how he believes in freedom because he's about the hookah bars and he's very upset about the shisha stuff, and so he's all upset. And then when I started explaining to him that a veteran with a prescription from Veterans Affairs for medical cannabis to deal with PTSD could not go into a store and have an educated conversation about a Health Canada approved medical vaporizing device because that conversation would be illegal, I thought his head was going to explode. Like, he couldn't believe that this would be a world that we live in. You have a veteran try to goes to a vaporizer store and he wants to know which of these two vaporizers should I use for my medical condition. And now they can't tell him because it's like selling tobacco. You can't talk about the product, right? You can't have an educated conversation. That same veteran couldn't go in and say, I've never consumed cannabis before. I want to. I know it's good for PTSD. Which of these strains do I smoke? Right? Should it be an indica? Should it be a sativa? Should it be a whatever? You know, that conversation can't happen. You can't talk about it. You can't have an informed discussion.
Indeed.
What is the point of that?
Stupid.
It's stupid.
They're trying to give our starving doctors a couple more hours so they can write.
Well, but funny you say that because for the last 10 years we've been kicking and screaming with the Canadian Medical Association to get their doctors to write prescriptions for cannabis, and they refuse to do so. You can't. People always criticize the dispensaries in Vancouver. They say, "Well, why do you use traditional Chinese medicine doctors? Why do you use naturopaths? Why are they quote unquote? They're not real doctors, right?" Well, okay, never mind the bias there. Let's talk about the fact that the CMA won't hear these cases. They won't talk to these patients. If your only option is a naturopath, then you're going to go to a naturopath.
It all boils at the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. Who has the more money? Who has more influence over them?
Yep. And if we let these
Their
companies,
drug reps are so much more of a friend to these doctors than their own friends most of the time.
and if we let these big companies just write these laws the way that it's going right now, nobody in Canada will benefit. Nobody will get the good quality cannabis that they want,
It
the
boils
safe
down
stuff.
to who makes the rules.
The people make the rules. They need to
People
remember
make
that.
the rules,
They got to
but-
stand up.
Yeah.
You got to stand up. You got to write your MPP. You got to write your MP. You got to talk to your city councilor. You got to say,
Indeed.
I want a cannabis economy. I want jobs. I want taxes. I want tourism. I want everything above board and over the counter. It should be sunlight on this industry, not more monopolies, more shame, more
Yeah.
I agree 100%. But we don't take the initiative.
No.
I could say I don't
They
take the
expect all the
initiative.
stoners to do nothing.
Right?
So they expect,
They think we're sedated.
it sucks.
Yeah.
Oh, they took it away. I'll do it. No.
Yeah. And
Fill their answering machines with messages saying, I go to the Hot Box Cafe, and I don't know what I would do if they closed it.
I vote.
Yeah.
I vote.
I'm gonna make the most ridiculous. They're gonna take away my job. I almost lost my place to Queen Video closing. And, like,
Wow.
at the end of a month, job place just disappear under my feet. Where am I gonna go? What am I gonna do? Nothing. I would have been so screwed. Couch surfing back into my parents' place.
Yeah.
Like I don't.
And
it's still.
You don't want Jesus to go back to his parents'
I
house.
can still lose my job.
If you lived in
No way.
if you live out in
I don't even know if can I apply for unemployment insurance.
Well, exactly, you can't because you haven't been paying into DEI. And these are people that that you could tell that same story in Kenora if you work in a grow up because it's the only job up there, right? You're a trimmer, you make $15-20 an hour if you're
Now
good
you
at
gotta
it.
go into logging.
Yeah. Right, what do they think is going to happen if they make 25, 45, whatever? We still don't even know the full numbers because we're still getting our heads around that, but there's lots of jobs.
But as you
Oh,
said,
I'm up.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks. It was a
Awesome.
real
Thank you so
pleasure.
much. I'll be in touch
Absolutely.
with you.
Yeah,
Thank you so
yeah.
much.
Just drop me an email to that.